Okay, so another modification or another, I'm calling them proposals in the wiki. It's called ADP 1904, and it's about a cleanup for the typecasting and serialization. The problem is that the process that we are in the process of refactoring field classes. If you don't know what it is, then under pull requests there is a pull request which has actually been here for a while. It's called add support for more fields, and the idea of this pull request, I think is it the right one? Yeah, so implement the separate classes for number, percent, rating, and so on and so on. And we're merging it into Epic Field Refactor. So that's the pull request. I don't know where it go. Did we merge it? Maybe we merged it.
Yeah, I think we merged it. It had this Boolean field.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, we did merge it. Okay, so the idea is that in the initial implementation of ATK data, we only had one class which is called field, and it was extended into field SQL, which didn't do anything much. It simply helped building queries. But there was a lot of logic which should probably be localized into dedicated classes under fields, such as Boolean, number, list, date, and so on and so on. And then there was quite a discussion here about which types of fields we should have. We started by adding a Boolean, which is this one, and there is a pull request for number, and we can keep going and keep implementing that. So since we're doing that, it would be nice to also clarify and maybe clean up the way how typecasting and serialization works. And the things I'm explaining in this document is typecasting, normalization, serialization. If you're not sure what they mean or how are they different, I'll explain that now. And we can group fields into native fields, such as the ones defined by ATK. Then there might be some fields which are not supported across all databases so well. Yeah, like for example date or Boolean, where SQL might not have support for Boolean field or date field, so need a little bit more work. And then we also have to consider user-defined field types. So if someone wants to build a new one, like password, but we also have to support that. We have to consider backward compatibility, and previously I thought that if we implement the date class, the date field class, it would work exactly the same as the type date, and we simply remove code here and put it inside here, which is what we did with the Boolean field. But actually, now I'm thinking that maybe we keep this working as it is right now, implement all of the classes in parallel, and then sometime in the next version we will remove the support for this kind of type definition. So it will the existing code will be removed, and we will only have the classes. Simply because some things might change slightly, such as the way how you define the formats. Right now, if you use the type date, you can define a format of the SQL, how the SQL field is formatted when it's inserted into a SQL database, but it's I want to change that. Right, so and again explaining it here, I'm saying that when the field has some sort of information for the UI, we are putting it all under the array, under the property UI. So it's only logical if we have a similar property called persistence, and everything related to persistence we will store in there. And therefore, if we try to be consistent with the UI, so for the UI we have this format here, and for the persistence we would have something like this, right? So we say, okay, we're storing the date, but the format for the date field inside the persistence would be this. So that's the first thing I'm proposing. And I have like a question or like a checkbox here which says, should we call it persistence or something else?
Yeah, probably something else, because we already have model persistence property.
Yes, but this is inside
field persistence.
This is more like a persistence config or
yeah, not sure what name would be better, but simply persistence can be easily misunderstood.
The other idea I was considering is if we have a property. So when it comes to UI, this is UI is quite consistent, right?
Yeah.
But persistences are we have lots of them. So what if we have instead of having just one property persistence, we will have properties SQL, property API, property MongoDB, and so on.
Oh no. But why field should care about persistence at all?
No, it shouldn't. And again, I'll mention that later at some point. So field shouldn't know anything about persistence. So it's okay. Yeah, I agree that we should have one property.
But maybe we shouldn't have such property at all, and persistence need to typecast date value to.
But there is no way how we can customize the format. For example, how do you define the format for a specific field? And this is just math information. It's very similar to the UI. What else can you do?
Yeah. I was thinking that in this case, how to store this this date, but persistence should know that itself.
Well, it knows.
Why not typecasting? Why we are not considering typecasting here? The typecasting do the same.
Yeah, typecasting will rely on this information, but similarly, how we can affect the UI presentation of the field just slightly through the UI property. I think that we should have a dedicated property inside the field, which can configure the way how it's being stored in a SQL. And normally, yes, the typecasting will have a reasonable default to how the date is being saved. But for example, you're storing the date of birth, or let's say you're storing a date time inside your database, and you just want to say whether it should store the time zone or not, or what time zone it should be stored in. So how do you configure that?
For one specific field.
Yes, yeah, for individual field.
Yeah, then probably we need.
Do you have something else than the format inside that persistence array?
It's just a concept for now, so probably we will be adding more. It will be more than the format, but for now, it's just you could define the format either for all persistences like this or for individual persistence, which is SQL. So we can define like that. I don't know if we should do MySQL or just SQL in here, because to be honest, the SQL agnosticy is provided by DSQL, So Agile data doesn't really care whether it's MySQL or Oracle. It sees them all as just a SQL.
And why we are not thinking about the typecasting here? Like, really?
We'll get typecasting is here. It's a long document. We'll get to typecasting.
Okay.
So we have to go through it quickly, right? So, okay. Then the use of type parameter. So right now, the property type is used to determine what's the type of the field. That's the only place we can really see the type of the field. Now, if we introduce a new class, like field date, I'm saying that we will still declare the type date, and it will help us to make sure that if, for example, Gaurav implements a really fancy way of storing dates and implements his own field type, he can, field class, he can still use type date, and the UI will respect that, and it will treat it as a compatible date field. Okay. I'm also suggesting that for the field class, we can introduce a new property called legacy true, and then if or something like that, or and if legacy is true, then we would use the typecasting which is currently implemented. If it's false, that means we're using a new date class. Then the typecasting will be following the rules which are laid out in this document. Right, so this is primarily to avoid backward compatibility issues.
So in respect to the future of ATK framework, I just want to add something here. We need to be very sure when we change something, because let's say people have started using Agile Toolkit and then suddenly we change everything. We need to respect that.
Gaurav, we have lots of tests, and if we do any change which breaks any of the tests, we're making sure that we fix that. So surely there are some use cases which are not covered by tests, and then maybe we'll break someone, but it's really difficult for us to anticipate that. So just having the test suite is really important. It also gives us more confidence to actually change things. And I'm thinking that at some point we will change the test use from using this to using this, and we will be making sure that it will not break. So all the tests work the same.
Okay.
But what we found with Emons right now, there are a lot of areas which are undefined right now, and they're not working as they should. So it needs to be clear. Okay, now terms, right? So Agile data has to deal with several situations. For example, setting so the value is stored in a native PHP as a native PHP type, and also may be an object. For example, it's a date time object in case of date. Persistence may opt to use some special storage format like this for SQL. Mongo uses a special class, MongoDate, for storing date. And then, other databases will also have different ways how to store. Also, some persistence might not support native types and user types, and we need to have a reasonable fallback. So maybe there is so maybe we're storing file as a CSV, and CSV doesn't have any formats at all, right? So we need to store data somehow, and we need to be able to read it back. So how do we do that? And here is a workflow, right? So after the field is defined, we are assigning the value to the field with this. And when this is happening, the process is the value is normalized. Yeah, so we call this process normalization. So whenever you assign something to the field, for example, if it's a Boolean field and you assigned a value 1, it will be typecasted into a Boolean value actually. So this is the process called normalization. Also, if the type is string and you assign the value which contains trailing spaces, it will remove those trailing spaces because it's not nice if you have any input to store those extra spaces for strings. So this is already a process which is implemented in ATK. Works quite well. Then the field class can cast a value to string. So that's new, right? So we don't have it right now. Currently, fields, they don't know how to convert themselves into a string. For example, date field is always date field. If you do some export and there are date values in there, you might end up having those date values on your hands, objects. So if we have this toString, that means that each field will have a reasonable callback on how to convert itself into a standard string. So date has a standard format. We could just use that because it's a standard. And it's not about presentation, so the UI persistence will probably display fields dates differently, but this is mostly for storing it into JSON or something, or including it in a debug info, or maybe putting in log file.
Mm-hmm.
And then similarly, there is a there's a method called setFromString, which is reverse to this. Yeah, so if we use toString, and then we can use the value of that to this method to reinitialize the same value, basically unserializing. For some of the fields that are quite complex and have maybe storing complex values, like array, this field can actually output JSON, and this field will consume JSON. So as long as they compatible, it's all good. Ideally, the format should be as simple as possible and should be readable. So we shouldn't just try and do the JSON of everything. We want to have, yes, and if possible, so if you convert it to string and then pass it back through a normalization, it should work. Yeah, so if you, for example, take a date field, convert it to string, you get the ISO date, and then you assign it using this expression, it should still be fine.
Mm-hmm.
Although it's not a requirement. And then UI persistence and templates, they will rely on toString as a fallback. So normally, again, it will use the UI persistence. But if UI persistence doesn't know how to handle, for example, a user-defined field type, it will execute toString and it will display it. When saving into persistence, it's not familiar with the type. Yeah, so if we're saving somewhere, it will use toString as well. And then persistence might do typecasting on its own. Right, so this is like takes precedence. Yeah, so if SQL knows how to store date better than ISO date, then it will take matters into its own hands and perform the typecasting inside the persistence class. So there will be example a little bit down there. Convert the value. And it will consult field persistence for any additional options for this typecasting. And yeah, and then finally, as Iman said, fields should have no knowledge of persistences.
Mm-hmm.
So these are the basic kind of workflow here. Next, any questions for this? Anything to add?
Looks good so far.
All right. So okay, on persistences now. When I'm thinking that we need to add a new persistence, which is called array of strings. And the problem right now, we have a persistence array. But when you store something in this array, the values of that array are actually in the PHP format. So if you store date inside the array, it will store. Is it right, Imans?
Yeah.
So
it will not do any typecasting or something.
It doesn't do any typecasting. If we do array of strings, it will typecast everything into strings. So if there will be a date field, the value of that field inside that array will be always stored as a string, which makes it incredibly easy to do the JSON encode of this array, or store it inside a CSV. Actually, the JSON and CSV can extend this class and then build on top of that.
So why not to add typecasting in persistence array and creating another array of a string. Why not do type thing in there?
Yeah, Iemans, why don't we do that? I know backward compatibility is one thing, but
No, it's not about backward compatibility. It's like why to make too much options for to do, like when it's required. If you are storing a date, array should typecast it simply. There's no object. There's no reason to save it in as an object there.
Why not to store objects or some hierarchical arrays in there? You don't always need to cast everything to strings. Maybe it's just an array in session.
yeah, I also thought of session and performance. So if we storing stuff in session, and then we want to read the stuff in session, pretty much all the PHP objects have a really good serialization techniques, and session supports that. So we don't really need to manually convert it to string.
Yeah, we need some persistence which don't typecast, and we can extend it to arrays of strings, for example, which does this typecasting.
I'm not really sure about the name. It could be string array. String array. So
there can be a property also in array persistence that we want that serialization should be done, or it can be a property, and we just do the typecast, because when you are saving, it's all okay. When you load, which value you want to present in database, it's more in the loading than in the saving of persistence array, especially.
Maybe we'll consider that.
Sure, we can proceed then. That was just my idea.
Iemans, if we try to modify array and have it and code, use strings.
Just add some property to.
No, not the property, but I mean, make array do the serialization or typecasting by default. And if we run into any problems, then we can split them up and create array of strings. But by default, just do it like everything would be array of string.
But then it will not be backward compatible.
It won't, but I don't think
we can do opposite.
We can just see how much stuff will break.
It is okay, like to do it how it is right now, and you create another class array of string, extending array, setting property. So even if somebody wants the persistent array with that property, he can.
Yeah. Okay. I will look into that.
Okay, we'll think about that. It's good feedback. Okay, moving on. So serializing. So normally when we're saving model data into persistence, it will find the right way to typecast it, and there are 3 ways, actually 4, where it can get typecast. So the first, or actually second way, is to execute persistence typecast save field. So in this case, for example, SQL might decide how it wants to save a data field, and then it will return. If it doesn't have a specific handling for the date field, it will execute field to string, which may return something different, or it can just simply call a parent of field to string, which will resort to serialize. So if Gaurav adds a new type, new field, and it not defined to string, then it will by default serialize. But all of the standard types, they will override this method and will have something like this. In here, string function to string is just return string. Okay, no serialization necessary because we know that the value is string, and other way around. For consideration, so we can make this fallback serialization smarter and try not to serialize it if it is a scalar value. Yeah, for example. But again, I'm not sure about this.
So yeah, you're right. Let's say it's an integer and you try to convert it to a string. It must not convert the integer to a string. It can be some problem. I don't know.
No, integers can be a string, so I think it's absolutely fine.
It can be, but it shouldn't be.
Why not?
Because then, as you supposed, you can export or you can use that data in somewhere. Like
So-
if it's an array.
Remember where toString is used, right? So, for example, we're storing in the SQL data table, and we just
Okay.
convert, because it's gonna be like
Got it.
nasty otherwise.
Right. I got it.
Okay, so I want to call this process of fallback serializing. Yeah, so if it goes through the fallback and it serializes itself, this is fallback serializing. So no one asked value to be serialized, but it was serialized because it's a fallback. And it's only if the implementation didn't care enough to provide a better way to save that string. But then we have a property which is called serialize. Yeah, we have this property now. We will keep it, and in there you can define a way how to serialize the field. For example, serialize JSON here. So what happens with this is instead of going through those 1, 2, 3, if the serialize is set, it will start by converting it to string, then serializing it into JSON, and simply passing it into persistence. So if, for example, if SQL is storing data as usual, you will have it in the format year, month, date. But if you add something like serialized JSON like this, it will convert data into string first, then it will serialize it into JSON, and then it will store it inside SQL.
Mm-hmm. Can it be a callback function also?
Yeah,
it will solve.
Yes,
it may solve a lot of things.
You can. User-defined type. So we'll look into typecasting and then serialization as well. As before, it is possible to use for user to define callback for typecasting like this. So you have date and you have the method to encode and decode. This is typecasting, remember, yeah? So that's this essentially overrides, and we already have this. This already works, but I'm also suggesting that we should be able to define typecast on persistence level, right? Because typecast is persistence specific. So if I want to override how SQL persistence is encoding my date fields, I can do it with this statement, right? So instead of having like passing format into the default typecasting, I can just do my own typecasting here and do anything I want inside that callback as an option.
So, Romans, I'm here. I agree with Immense that the way you are looking at it as you are using UI and you want to use inconsistent the persistence, but we have to we must consider this thing that persistence is it's something under dependency. This data is dependent on DSQL and persistence is already there. Why we can use UI? Because it's not there. There's no one to take care of that thing, and we can use it later on. But the persistence should be taken care of. The persistence, the field must not know anything about persistence. So because it has already something to take care of. UI we are using because we don't have anything, and we are storing it for the future use. So it makes sense.
Okay.
Means like immense, it's okay.
Persistence
cannot be.
When the model is being initialized, it's not. So when the init method is called and it defines all the fields, Now we're just saying, okay, if it happens that we are saving this model inside SQL persistence, that this is the callback which we should use. I just I don't know how to do it differently. I don't have any, then that means we'll have to create a field.
Use case, we are already having so much tools to do that thing. We are already having typecast and these tools and persistence. We can override that persistence. Why to introduce one more
thing? You can't
thing?
reasonably override persistence. If you just need to change the format of a single field, you're not gonna go and override the whole persistence. That's crazy.
But we can do typecast then. We're already having that.
Yeah, typecasting inside the field, but okay, you need a new class, right? And again, as we discussed before, fields do not know anything about persistence. So inside the field, you can't do anything persistence related.
You can serialize but not typecast.
Yeah, you can serialize but not typecast. So if you want to change the typecast, the only way is to feed it as a parameter here. I just don't see any better implementation for this.
And we are looking at for just a field if I want to change something.
Yeah, on the field level. Because if
we don't
you define
the field.
Yeah, so even if you define, for example, your own data format, right? So you have go update, and you set type to date, so it's consistent with everything else, and then you go and set the toString for your field to store data differently. The chance is that the persistence will look at the type, it will see, oh, it's a date, and it will take the value of your field and just do whatever it wants with it, and you will not be able to override it.
And one typecasting comes in between before saving.
So typecasting, persistence can take over typecasting for a specific type. I actually have example for that. Let me find that.
Vice versa.
So here we have an example of MongoDB class, right? It has a field called typecast save field, which gets the value and like the field definition and the value, and it says if the type is array, then just do this, or if the type is date, then convert it to MongoDB. And at this point, you don't have access to this, and it takes precedence over the field itself.
Okay.
So that's the only way to.
But don't you think the persistence should be the field? The persistence should be given to the field itself. When we are defining a fields and we are overriding something, that should be given the precedence. That solves everything.
Yeah, I think so. Okay, let's move on. Yeah, so if serialize and typecast are specified together, in this case, the value will be encoded through typecast. Sorry. Yeah, it will be encoded through typecast and then serialized. However,
no serialization.
No. So actually, what I probably thought here is that it will be converted to string. However, if you specify encode functions through persistence. Oh no, hold on. Yeah, so it's different. See, I'm making it slightly different. So you have the typecast property on the date, and it says in this case the typecast take precedence. So instead of calling toString, it will call encode function. Encode is expected to return string, which is then will be used for all persistences, and will also be returned by toString. again, I don't know the actual how this will work, but if you specify typecast here, you take precedence and you can override the way how the string is stored. And as a result, if you do serialize and typecast, then it will execute typecast first because it overrides to string, and then it will serialize that value according to the strategy you specify. But if you specify in code function through persistence property, so if you use this, then it will use the default to string. It will not use that. It will use default to string, which is defined inside the field, which will then be serialized and stored in a database directly without further typecasting.
I'm not sure I understood.
And I don't sure why we require this thing. We are already having things just to speak.
In which case typecast takes precedence?
If you define it like this, as a field property.
But it's not typecast, it's serialized.
No, it's typecast.
Why? Persistence does typecasting. Fields don't do typecasting.
Yes, but we have a property typecast right now.
Really?
You can, if you override. Yeah, like I'm using it. Don't remove it, please. I use it a lot.
Okay.
Yeah. So it will be inside the persistence. So if it defined like this, it will apply only on persistences. But if it applied on the field, then it will also cast when you convert field to string as well.
I see typecast as a magical thing here. It can do a lot of things if just given precedence to the field.
Yeah, but I'm not sure about why we need to use this to string.
So why we need this thing to string? Not about to string, but like array persistence is not having proper control over dates. So in there I have just done this thing. If it's a JSON, just return the date things. So typecasting is managing everything. It's a simple control. It's a very simple control when it saves and when it loads. I have proper control of the date. It's more like before save and after load.
Yeah, I guess it's very useful. So for various things, you can define anything you want in there. For example, not sure where it was. Yeah, you can use your own formats, and that's it.
Anything can be done. Like I've used it like anything.
But then maybe we don't need serialize at all.
No, serialize
yes,
is important.
That's what I'm saying.
Serialize is important because serialize it goes on top of typecasting. So regardless of the how typecast works, you can always serialize things.
But you wrote there that serialize and typecast can be specified together, in which case value will be first encoded through typecast.
Yes.
So typecast is used anyway.
Well, to a degree. I mean, it depends how the typecast is defined. So if the typecast is defined like this, it will use this function. This function will take precedence. But if either typecast is not set here, or is set on persistence level, then we will serialize first and not use typecast at all.
So when I use serialization, the manual serialization in the typecast is like when I was about to save a model in field, and the model was taking a lot of in-depth things. So typecast was removing the properties and unsetting the things, and then serialization was doing serialization. That's what I did. Fun.
Yeah, maybe what you needed to do is normalization.
I don't know.
If you're cleaning
Because I was
things
not
up, if it's just one way, that's normalization. Because normalization is one way. For example, so, okay, think about this, yeah? So if you're saving a string and the string has a trailing spaces, the removal of the spaces is one-way operation. Once you remove them, you can't add them back. So that's normalization. You just normalize the string. Or if it's a number and it has some spaces before the number, again, needs to be removed. This is normalization.
Okay. I was doing it wrong then.
Okay, so some use cases for serialize, and actually, this is a good one, right? You can define a pair for an encryption and decryption for the serializer. So, for example, if you want to store you want to keep the way how field works, but you want to encrypt it using strong encryption, you can use a special encryption and decryption functions here. You can also store it inside JSON. So, for example, if it's an array, and you want to somehow store it, you go JSON or.
If it's an array, then typecast will do that.
Yeah, because when I initially was designing this system, I wanted to have only one. I didn't want to have typecasting and serialization, and it wasn't working. I'm not sure the exact details back then, but I remember that my initial attempt was only had typecasting, and I had to add serialization also.
Yeah, it's a good example about this encryption. Yeah, because the field type will be string, and you need to encrypt it. So yeah.
Okay. Right. So normalization. I think I already mentioned that. Some notes. New type, which is called new class of field, which is called blob. We don't have that now. Right now we have a typeless field. So for some fields, if you omit the type, it will not do anything about the value. It will try to preserve it as it is and store it in the database as it is. Right. So for that, we will add a new class called blob, and it will just do the same thing. All right.
Sorry. Currently, I think in quite a lot of places, if type is not set, it will think that the type is string.
Not really, because normalization will not trim it. It doesn't trim fields without type. And so there might be some change, but it is quite similar to string, which is why we don't bother, to be honest.
Okay.
And the other thing is that if we use array, we might need to have an underscore in here, because we can't call class array. It needs to be array with an underscore.
And Roman's my suggestion: why not underscore array? It's more standard way.
So hold on, which was it? Imans, remember we used that PHP parsing and parsing library?
Yeah.
PHP code. What was the name of it?
Let me check.
IST. Yeah, last one. One of these. That's the guy who wrote them.
Yeah. This is
right. And so basically, that's not the library. I think it's called PHP parser.
Yeah, but the author is.
Yes, and basically what he does, because he has to deal with a lot of classes which have the name consistent with he uses like a clone, right? He adds underscore behind it, new, and we saw it here, and we thought, okay, that's okay. We'll just use the same, and that's why underscore is under. I'm not aware of any formats or of any standards which say that this should be in front.
Also, I'm not sure if a class name could have underscore as first symbol.
Probably can.
No, it can have.
But if underscore is the first symbol, I would treat it as like a hidden class or system class, and also it messes up the ordering as well. So print goes after P, like letter P. If it underscore isn't first, then it will be on the bottom. Right. So my question here is, maybe we should allow users to omit that and then manually check and convert array into that, but no.
No. Better not.
Yeah, I'm also thinking that like in a few versions, when we remove the legacy counting of types, users will still be able to specify type here, and then we will just map. So right now, when the front end like form is deciding on which field decorators to use, it looks at the type, and there is like a table there which converts each type into a class, and we probably will have something similar.
Mm-hmm.
I guess type is a good idea. It is consistent with our pattern. If you have defined the field,
we will not remove it. Exactly.
We'll take the if type. It's nice, yeah.
Right. Okay. So going next. Oh, there it goes. Color array. Sorry, not string array, but scalar array. That was the other name for array of strings. Scalar array means that the values of that array are scalar. Right, so consideration for contained data. And this is something Imans was working on. For example, let's say we have model user, and user have a number of login attempts, which is stored within a field login attempts. Yeah, so that's the name of the field. And it says contains many. We give the name of the class, the model class, login attempt. We can do some magic like this. So we're saying attempts equals user. We traversing into login attempts, and then doing the count. And even though this is an array, we should be able to use action like this and get number of login attempts. We can also do user ref, so we can traverse into login attempts and insert a new attempt. And it should actually save the user. So the model for the user will be saved automatically. So that's the containment, right? It's just to refresh your memory, because I think we discussed this a few weeks ago. So now question is, how does it work with the typecasting? And in this implementation, the reference is defined. So it needs to create both a field and a reference. Yes, something like that. Add ref and add field. When it adds field, it adds it as an array because it needs to store array data. And then a specific class for contains many reference. So I don't have the implementation here, but basically it will read the data from that field, which is an array associated with the array of strings persistence or something like that, and it will initialize the class for login attempt. It will return the login attempt with that. Plus, additionally, it will add a hook. So if anyone tries to insert anything inside login attempt, it will update, will extract the data, update the field, this field here, and save the model. And
yeah,
I think that's what Imans already have right now, but the only thing is this. So it doesn't really change anything much.
Yeah. This doesn't change. What will probably maybe change is if you nest this contains many, which contains many.
So I solved this immense. If it can help somewhere, I don't know, but I'm always doing workarounds. and somebody mentioned it also in Gitter. What I did in condensed many, I just changed the persistence to array, and the field value I just deserialized it and used as persistent array for the further model. That's what I did internally.
Yeah, well, we have the same. There's actually a pull request for that at the moment, which already does that. And the only thing here is that we're dealing with array of string, which means that this persistence will can be nicely stored here, so it doesn't have any weird things. We can actually say that the array type array must be an array of scalar things. So shouldn't have any weird objects inside or recursive references or anything like that.
Yeah, but in case you have nested contains many, it will contain nested array.
Yeah, which will be serialized again, and we're fine. Because if you store this, even if this model, so if this model is associated with another array persistence, when this is stored, let's think. Yeah, it will be serialized, so probably will be serialized into JSON and then stored as a value.
Yeah, and then when you save parent model, it will serialize it again.
Yeah, which is fine.
Mm-hmm.
I think. Well, I don't know. Well, it doesn't say serialized actually. Yeah, it doesn't have serialized. So what we might say that if array is saving into array of strings, then array of strings knows better, and it will not serialize array. Instead, it will store it as it is, which is a typecasting, right? Persistence specific typecasting for array type.
Yeah.
We can now implement it cleanly.
Yeah, probably we'll need a bunch of tests for that.
So, okay, we go through this document. I hope it clears everything up. Now we can finalize.
And as the same time, it makes more confusions, but things are looking nice.
Yeah, I mean, if as long as we know how to implement it, we can also document it, and then implement this as well. Make sure it's all done correctly. But more importantly, I think the big change from the way how things were in the past is that we're adding in new types, and instead of refactoring existing code, we keep existing code. We simply add in a new copy with all the typecasts, make sure that the new one works correctly, and then at some point we will switch. It's like we did with the lookup field and the dropdowns. So we had a dropdown class, and then we had the lookup class, and then we made lookup class default instead of the dropdown. No one noticed, so it was okay. And then we removed the dropdown.
Yeah, but in this case, I'm not sure. Maybe there will be some conflicts between old code and new implementation.
Well, if we put that legacy flag, if we make use of that, then there shouldn't be.
Mm-hmm.
And why not be having default backward compatibility if you can do that? Why to use that flag?
Because as we mentioned, Gaurav, the previous functioning of typecasting is very undefined. It's very random, so we're not sure how it should have been done. So we will implement it correctly, and then we will test the code. So we'll be able to test your code by enabling these new classes globally, and if your application crash, you can switch it back. Maybe something like that. You can file a bug saying, okay, there is something wrong with the Boolean, because we run into the Boolean encoding issue with emails.
I'm sorry, guys. I'm gonna have to leave. Something came up. So you want to do this next week, probably for the multi-line?
For the multi-line, yeah, sure, why not?
All right. Sorry about that. Just something came
Yeah,
up.
maybe you'll have actually something working really well.
All right.
Yeah. Okay.
Have a good week.
Thanks, Elaine.
See you.
Right. So, Goro, I think that's pretty much it.
Okay. Bye-bye, Len.
Then I don't have anything else to discuss.
Yeah. It explains. Oh, okay. I have to remove this pull request. I've made the thing you made the mention in this my pull request. I think I had cleared it. I'll pull my pull request and then send it again.
Okay.
I did it better way. Like no data should be changed. You said okay.
Yeah. Okay. All right, Goro. I have to go as well. Soon.
So I'll try to create a still not with the joint thing.
Yes, try to
okay.
localize.
Anyway. Sure. Okay.
Okay. Bye, guys.
Mm.
Okay. Bye.
Okay. See you.
Bye. See you.